If you're not choosing what you want to do and who you want to be in life, someone else is going to do the choosing for you. I was a financial pundit for many years. I would talk about what my feelings were on the economy and so on. To build trust and transparency, you have to be vulnerable. Once I started being more vulnerable, these times I went broke, these times I was suicidal. And then people say, what you see is what you get. So I trust what he's saying. Vulnerability is a way of trading some aspect of your privacy for freedom. Being free allows you to be yourself. College is so distorted in its incentives, that's increasing income inequality. The government will ruin your life if you try to stop paying your student loans. Drop out of college. The price of college has gone up 10 times faster than inflation over the past 4 years. It doesn't make economic sense. So you can learn classroom skills in the classroom. You don't only learn the skills of what you love, doing what you love. Saying no is so valuable for carving out freedom in your life. I started kind of practicing saying no in uncomfortable situations to things I normally would say yes at, and I realized I was getting so much more productive in my life. So I just want to do my agenda, not someone else's agenda that I strongly feel doesn't 100% align with mine. It's a very important rule for me. Never take time from the things you love to do more of the things you hate.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... London Real went to New York City to speak with James Altucher on this episode, and I went to his comedy club on the Upper West Side, and that's what James is like. He just went ahead and bought a comedy club, and now he actually practices as a stand-up comedian, but his background is in so many things. He used to go on all the financial news channels. He created internet businesses. He would lose $10 million, make $10 million, lose $10 million. I love James. He's got such a vulnerable writing style. He also has a great concept and book called Choose Yourself. He's super curious, and it was great to reconnect with him at his comedy club. I hadn't spoke to him in about 3 or 4 years in London, and he's always surprising me with new ideas. He's also got a great practice that you can use, which is to write down 10 ideas every single day and see where that takes you in your life. Also, ideas can have sex with other ideas and create great new passions that could take your life in a new direction. So I know you're going to enjoy this incredible episode with James Altucher. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is James Altucher, the best-selling author, chess master, comedian, entrepreneur, and broadcaster. You host 2 podcasts, The James Altucher Show and Ask Altucher, and your blog, The Altucher Confidential, has over 25 million readers. You've written thousands of articles for the Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch, and the Financial Times, and your book, Choose Yourself, was named by Businessweek as one of the top 12 business books of all time. James, welcome back to London Real in New York City.
Thanks for having me back, Brian. I'm glad to be here. I'm gonna take over your podcast or your video for the first 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm assuming you would.
So this is
you always
James
do that.
This is James out. Be
you
quiet,
on my
Brian.
show? Wait, I got to at least start the show. Or are you going to take it over?
No.
All right, go.
This is James Altucher taking over for 5 minutes. Brian Rose's London Real. Brian, how are you doing? It's been 4 years since we last got together. 4.5 years.
I'm great, man. It's great to be back in New York City. It's great to see you, and it's great to watch you take your game to the next level.
Well, Brian, I've been watching you take your game to the next level. Like, I feel... So you've been doing this for a long time, like 7 or 8 years, But I feel like 4 years ago when we met and I was on London Real, you were just beginning to really ramp and put your full resources behind it. And you have done an incredible job. Like, your audience is so much larger, and you've really taken advantage of YouTube even more than you've taken advantage of the podcasting aspect of what you do. What did you do specifically to grow your audience so big?
Good question. I mean, look, I started this as just a way to connect and communicate with people. I mean, I literally walked out of my job in finance for 10 years in London and started broadcasting. And it started off as a project. And then at one point, I actually had someone on my show who's become one of my mentors. And I just thought, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I need to go all in. So I just decided to invest myself and money and everything in the company and just to start pushing it as hard as we could. And
Why do you think you weren't going all in? Like, what were you doing?
I think it was fear, to be honest, James. I think part of me it was like Grandpa in the woodshed. You know, I was like there. I was a one-man show. I was doing all the editing myself, and I just was being conservative. And I thought, I didn't have an income, and I was like, I'm going to spend all my banking savings on putting money into something I don't know has become a business. And I think it was just fear. And then when I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go all in on this. I'm going to hire people, and we're just going to go big. And ever since I started that, it's just been, it's blown up. And I try to remind myself that every week to just go bigger and bigger and bigger.
And so what were some of the key hires you needed to do to kind of take that next step?
Hiring the first person was a real weird thing because, like I said, I was in the wood shop like Grandpa tinkering with his toys, and it's a fun, comfortable place to be, but you don't get challenged. So doing my first full-time hire, a first salary, and then having someone there watching me, I thought I worked hard, but when you got someone watching you, you work harder. And then the next hire, the next hire, the next hire, that was big. Just doubling up our production, starting to make movies, just always doubling down. And that's what we've been doing every year for the past few years, and it's made a huge difference.
You say you try to improve each week. Like, do you start the week thinking, okay, this is the new thing we're going to try this week?
Well, if you look at all of our shows, and you can watch them for 8 years now, it's our 8-year anniversary, so I think it's like 500 plus shows. Each one, I try to get better. So the first one, there was horrible lighting. I had horrible facial hair. I was wearing skateboarding clothes. The microphones were bad. We used to split the screen, like literally with people's faces in a third. And so then the next week was like, well, maybe we should get some lighting. Maybe we should get some better microphones. Maybe we should get a better studio. You came when we had the brand new studio with the chairs and the flags. Maybe we should get this kind of camera. Maybe we should hire someone to help us book guests. All of that stuff. Maybe we should hire someone to help us do thumbnails, hire more people on our video team, make a documentary film. These were all big things just to try to take it to the next level.
What's the documentary about?
So it's our fifth one, and it's called Reconnect, and it's about 3 of my ayahuasca ceremonies last year in Costa Rica, and the subsequent 18-month integration process of coming back to the real world and realizing that all of your visions and all the things you see that you should be is not reality, and no one around you understands what the hell you're talking about, and trying to integrate the visions you have about your family, your personal life, your business into this crazy world. And
Well, it's interesting because on the one hand, take something like ayahuasca or any kind of transcendental type of activity, whether it's meditation or hallucinogenics or therapy or whatever, and you're very much into transcendental meditation and so on. It seems like one goal is to discount the importance of everyday life, so you focus on your inner life, the idea that the only thing that's truly real is your own ability to find well-being and some sort of peace. On the other hand, we live in the so-called real world where you have to have goals and you look at your traffic numbers and you have to make an income. How do you bring those two sides into balance? Because you've been doing both very well.
Yeah, it's a crazy question. And meditation's one thing, but like an ayahuasca experience. I mean, last year I had the single most profound experience of my entire life in my second ceremony. It was also painful, extremely emotional, physically challenging, a lot of vomiting, a lot of crying. But I saw this version of the world, of myself, and all these things I could be. And then, like you said, you come back and you've got YouTube numbers, you got bills to pay, you got people who don't know what you're talking about, you got kids to feed. So trying to deal with that every single day is difficult. And the truth is, James, we live in the real world. And that's the problem, I think, in a lot of the psychedelic community is people go back for their 85th ayahuasca ceremony. And I'm like, what are you doing? It's like you got to try to process this in this real world that we live in. And so, yeah, you kind of got this vision of where you want to go, and then you got where you are today. And that delta is something you play with all the time. And if you have a really good mission statement, which I think now we have, you can stay on the course even when the numbers don't make sense, the YouTube numbers don't make sense. I mean, my accountants would would come to me every year and they're like, "What are you doing, Brian?" And I'd be like, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." And it's like only recently they're like, "Oh, I guess you know what you're doing." But it's just having that vision to stick to the course even when all the inputs are telling you you're wrong.
Well, what you say, we have to have a personal mission. What's your personal mission?
So my mission, and it took me a while, and I made it really clear when I got back from Costa Rica last year, is we decided that, first of all, what I'm doing with London Real, it's where Brian Rose ends and London Real begins is not clear to me whatsoever. And so for me, I am the show and the show is me. And I have to be very careful who I let in the studio, including you, because these people literally changed the course of my life. I mean, I dress this way because I have a mentor called the $50 billion man. I move the way I move because of a guy named Ido Portal in Israel who teaches fighters like Conor McGregor in the UFC how to move. I mean, like everything about me has changed by people that have come on the show. And so it's just become my life. And so for me, we have a mission, and that's simply to create a mass scale transformation of humanity into a fully empowered, conscious, and cooperative species. And we thought about those words, fully empowered, conscious, and cooperative. And everything we do, whether it's our London Real Academy or our movies or our broadcasts or anything, has to try to take someone's life and get them to transform themselves. Period.
Yeah,
and that's how I think we can solve all these bigger problems we're talking about. It's not about point the finger. It's not about you're doing climate change wrong. It's like, what are you doing to get over your own fears and your own challenges? That's what I think is the biggest problem of today.
I think that's so important because, and I agree very much with your mission. And so and I agree very much with, by the way, your philosophy and who you let into the studio. Like, people don't realize it. We're not reporters. Like, if someone's in the news, that doesn't qualify them, in my view, for a podcast. That qualifies them to have a little article in a newspaper. To be on a good interview podcast, you should be doing something that elevates yourself and that we can absorb some of that and the listeners can absorb some of that so that they can be elevated. That's the goal, I feel, of a good interview podcast.
Yeah, very much so. You were on Ice-T's podcast, and I'm super jealous, by the way, because he's one of my dream guests. And he has a great saying. He said, "Brian, it's not about the come up, it's about the come back." And so every guest on my show, I want to see what happened after they hit rock bottom. How did you come back from the loss? How did you come back from the struggle? How did you come back from the tragedy? That's something I think we can all learn from. So I agree. I don't care if you're an Olympic gold medalist. Honestly, there's thousands of those. I don't care if you're a rock star. There's thousands of those. But do you have a lesson you can teach us? That's how I invite people on my show.
So and I deal with this as well, with over 500 guests on London Real and super peak performers from every area of life. I mean, I love your show. How do you think you've changed? Like, it's hard to know what you would have been like if you hadn't had these 500 guests. There's no way to speculate on that. But what do you do to make sure? I mean, you can't take, like, let's say each of the 500 people have 10 suggestions. You can't take 5,000 suggestions and automatically incorporate it into your life. How do you decide, okay, this is useful for me. I can practice this. I can try this. I can get better.
I don't think I consciously decide. I think a few years ago, I looked at myself and I said, wait a second, something's going on with you. And, like I said, we had this academy and we were teaching kind of a business accelerator course for a while. And then someone said, Brian, why don't you teach something more about life? And I started looking about all of my habits that I had picked up over the years. And I was like, wait a second. And I deconstructed each one down to the person that came on my show. From Tim Ferriss talking about low media, to someone talking about meditation, to someone talking about gratitude, Mimi and Alex Icon talking about gratitude, and all of these people. And then I deconstructed it. So I think it's subconscious. I think you just pick these things up. But let me tell you a few truisms, James. I have 2 young boys, 2 and a 3-year-old. They would not be born if it wasn't for London Real. Period. There's no way I would have allowed the love and let these people into my life. Last year, I made a movie called Iron Mind where I did an Ironman race, and I confessed about my heroin addiction and overdose in New York City in 2001. I hadn't told my wife in 16 years that information, and now I talk about it freely. I would have never talked about that, and it would have been down inside me as this thing I was holding on to, James, and I don't think I would have been free to fully live my life. So that's another example. I've been sober now for 2 years, haven't had a drink of alcohol. And again, it wasn't like I was completely out of control, but it was like, why am I doing that when I need to be more high performance? So that's the thing. I move every day. I'm a break dancer now. I mean, that's crazy. I'm 48 years old, but I'm literally
51. I'm a break dancer.
Good man.
And
all right.
I learned in London when I was 12.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, we got to talk. I had Crazy Legs on, the guy from the Bronx.
Yeah. He was in
it's the movie Breaking, right?
Yeah, he wasn't in Breaking. He was in the other one that took place in New York City.
Yeah,
Gosh,
it was that opening scene at the dance club.
Beat. What was the breakdancing movie that was in New York City? Beat Street, yeah.
He was also in Flashdance.
Yeah, he was in Flashdance.
When she did the backspin at the last move, he was in the beginning, but he put a wig on, and he was the girl in Flashdance when she did the backspin.
I did not know that.
Final dance performance.
I think he was in a side. He was in a side scene in Flashdance where she's just walking by.
Yeah, and he's dancing on the street.
The Rocksteady crew was dancing.
Yeah.
He's part of that.
Yeah.
There was Crazy Legs in the so Crazy Legs, and then there was a couple like famous breakdancing names from the Rocksteady.
Another guy
crew.
from the Rocksteady was there as well. Yeah. So I've had him on. A guy named Storm, who's a German breakdancer who kind of brought it all back about 10 years after Rocksteady did it. So yeah, I've been super blessed.
Do you like Poppin' John? He's an LA-based guy, really good at like popping.
No, I mean no, and I'm cool with the popping too. I'm just focused on breaking right now.
Wow, okay, I'm more in the popping than in the breaking.
Popping's good too.
So,
Man.
yeah,
Breaking's
most people
hard.
don't make the distinguish the two, but breakdancing's very hard.
Man, it's such a physical thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on the floor all the time, but I got a windmill. I got some skills.
I never could get the
Took
windmill
me 3
going.
years to get a windmill. 3 years of training 3 or 4 times a week. So yeah,
All
I
right,
mean,
now you've inspired me. I'm gonna try to do a windmill.
Yeah.
I tried really hard back then, and I was a kid. I was a teenager. I should have been able to do it, but I couldn't do
it's
it.
so mentally challenging. It doesn't make any sense. You're rotating, everything's flying around. It took me a long time. Again, but that's me. I'm just kind of relentless on that, which can be good with breakdancing, bad with heroin. So, sometimes I don't know when to quit.
Well, that's just it. Is that clearly you have an addictive quality to you, and some people. There's all sorts of things you can get addicted to. Some people, when they're trying to find meaning in their lives and they can't, I think they fall to heroin or other drugs. But then there's so many productive addictions. Doesn't mean those are great. It's not good. Like, you could be addicted to something even healthy for you. You could be addicted to reading, but that might not be unhealthy for your life. Like, for instance, if you're avoiding your family because you're reading too much, that's not a healthy addiction, even though it seems that way. So you always have to be careful. Like, I always notice for myself, if I'm playing, so I get addicted to stupid things. Like, I'll get addicted to playing chess, but I'll play it 24 hours a day, like 1 minute speed chess on the computer. And I try to be meta aware that, this has slipped into addictive territory. It means I'm avoiding something else in my life. Yeah. Even though everyone else would say, that's so smart, chess. It's not if you're just playing it all day long, 1 minute chess on the computer, and you can't talk to your kids or family or whatever.
Yeah, if you're using it as something to not process feelings or to avoid the real world, it can be shopping, sex, Netflix, chess, like you said, or it could be a drug. But if you can just say, all right, what am I doing here? Am I doing this to not be present, to not be with these feelings? So I'm still learning, but there's also healthy addictions and unhealthy addictions for sure. And the unhealthy ones are something I like to avoid.
Yeah. Well, okay, I've taken over your podcast enough. I really wanted to at least make a dent in some of the questions I've had for you.
We can't go back, I don't think. So I'm just going to keep it rolling. James, something with you that I always teach my students is you are our poster child for vulnerability. And I have, like I said, an academy, and I teach people business and podcasting, public speaking. And I always say, if you can't get vulnerable, you're not going to be able to connect with the audience. And I always mention you. And it's always like, look at James Altucher. Look at almost every blog I've ever read of yours or anything. You're always telling us about how you started off in a failing scenario. And I was wondering if you could talk about why you're so comfortable being vulnerable and how far that's gotten you. And do you think it's a good tool for people to use?
Yeah, that's such a great question and so interesting. I don't know if I've thought about it exactly that way since sometime around 2010. I was always a little bit more vulnerable in my writing than a lot of my peers. But, if you go, I was a financial pundit for many years. I'd go on CNBC, I would dress in my suit, and I would talk about, with 4 other people in this big box of people, I would talk about what my feelings were on the economy and so on. And once I started being more vulnerable, these times I went broke, these times I was suicidal, these times the IRS closed down my house, or I lost my family, or whatever, people would always write to me at first and say, are you about to kill yourself, or did you have a brain tumor, or no one's ever going to invest in you again? You're revealing all this stuff. And what I found, though, was several things. One is your audience is an X-ray machine. They know, your listeners know, even if they don't know it consciously, they know if you're telling the truth about yourself or not. People, only 10% of communication is verbal. The rest is 90% is nonverbal. So people know there's something else going on here, but I can't put my finger on it, and they'll react that way whether they're realizing it or not. To build trust and transparency, you have to be vulnerable. And then people say, "Oh, what you see is what you get. I see this guy, and so I trust what he's saying." But there's another thing too, which is, I think the word privacy has become this weird word lately. It's almost this like legal word, like, "Oh, do you have privacy or no privacy?" But vulnerability is a way of trading some aspect of your privacy for freedom. So, for instance, when you talked about heroin, that was a very private thing for you, right? You said you held on to it for 16 years and didn't even tell your wife, let alone your audience. And so you traded that aspect of your privacy. And what did you get for it in return? You got freedom. Now there's more topics that you could talk about. There's more things that people know they can relate to you on. Your wife and family have a new comfort level with you, that they understand you at a deeper level. That's real, and I'm sure you felt it. This is freedom. And so it literally was a transaction. You took a chunk of your privacy, and you, just like you might trade, dollars for some object, you traded the currency of your privacy for freedom. And I bet you felt that way. I bet you felt relief, because someone who is out of jail suddenly feels more relief. Oh, I'm free. And I bet your audience grew, because now people saw there was this whole extra dimension to you that A, you were hiding, and B, this discomfort that they might have felt with you before was gone.
Yeah, no, very much so. It was scary as hell as well, but it really opened that up. Yeah.
I try to always, whenever I write something, I just refuse to hit publish unless I'm afraid of what people will think, or at least what some people will think. So there has to be a fear component. Else, I'm just publishing the same thing everyone else is publishing.
Like
if I just say,
here's
my 10 rules for leadership, a million other people have written that. So I can't write that. I can't, there's no fear there. I have to write like, here's the 10 ways I was the worst leader. People hated me and what I learned from it. So now there's I might be exposing some things in that people might even find repulsive. He did that as a leader, but we've all been there to some extent in our own lives. So again, it's part of also the art of storytelling is to be a little bit afraid of, you have to surprise yourself in order to surprise the reader. And then there's a third level, which is totally just about writing and storytelling, which is you want everything you do to have the arc of the hero. So when I failed living, and I've kind of gone broke and failed and been despondent several times over the decades. When I've been in a moment of failure, it's because I was sort of really scared of what people would think. I was living in some other guideline, some other path that somebody told me, like, oh, you have to go to college and then start a business and be successful. And once you're successful, you're smart, and no one should ever know that you're stupid. So I was afraid to let people know that I didn't go on this straight path. So that's the ordinary world. And then, in the arc of the hero, you go from the ordinary world to the extraordinary. The extraordinary is when I admit failure, and now I have to go on this very unusual path to find my way back. And that's going from the ordinary world to the extraordinary. And then along the way, you have bigger and bigger problems, and you meet your new friends and people who will help you until finally you have the greatest crisis of all, and you bring it back to tell the story. Like you bring it back and you have a podcast or you write an article or whatever, and that's the full arc of the hero. So to some extent, it's also good storytelling. If I just say, hey, I'm the greatest person ever, listen to me, that's a horrible story.
Do you think, I just read a book by Stephen Pressfield called Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. And I quoted him in my TED Talk because the war of art was a big thing with that concept of resistance. Do you think every great story is a hero's journey?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
what he says too.
Yeah. And he makes a good point in that book that, and also another book, The Artist's Journey, where the artists themselves are going on a journey. Somebody starts off thinking, oh, I'm going to write a best-selling novel, even though they've never had any experience. They just see this path that, oh, J.K. Rowling made $1 billion. And then now the call to extraordinary is, I'm going to be an artist. And that is a brutal task. You've been doing London Real for 8 years, and it's still an ongoing task to improve your artistry, and it happens in every single field of life. And so the artist journey matches the hero's journey. But if you think about it, even an advertisement is the hero's journey, not for the company, but for the viewer. So, like, let's say I don't know what the latest batch of ads is, but let's say it's a car ad, and a handsome guy and a beautiful woman are driving in this car on the desert, and whatever, they fade off into the sunset. So the company is not the hero in this story. The car is not the hero. The passengers who we relate to are the hero. So my ordinary world might be, I'm stuck at a job I don't like, in a life situation I don't like, but now here's this call to the extraordinary. I could buy this car, and suddenly I'll look better and healthier. I'll be with someone who also seems great and healthy, and we're driving off in the desert, escaping this bad life situation that I'm in. So even companies should think this way, not that they're the heroes, but that their customers are the hero, and their exposure to your product is their beginning on the heroes. The call to the extraordinary is when they see your product for the first time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Do you think that's in our DNA somewhere, like the hero's journey? Do you know?
I always wonder this. I mean, Joseph Campbell, who first kind of coined the term in his book Hero with a Thousand Faces, he would argue it was primal, because if you look at all the mythology going back 4,000 years, I mean, Jesus perfectly models the arc of the hero.
Yeah.
And we all know Star Wars is related to the birth of, the story of Christianity. Moses is the arc of the hero. There's so many arcs of the hero going back thousands of years. You think maybe it's primal, but I can't even guess why it would be primal. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's because stories used to be our primary way of teaching, right, before books and academies and universities. And so that resonates with people, I guess, because it teaches lessons. Those lessons allow us to survive. So, I had Dr. Jordan Peterson on the show, and he thinks, he talks about the Bible, that is somehow in our DNA. This isn't just some biblical book, but it's like stories for life that keeps us alive as a human species.
Yeah, like I don't know if you ever saw his video where he breaks down Peter Pan and how it all relates to our need to be a child, that comfort of first being in the womb and then being cared for by our parents, that feeling of fun in the sandbox, but that ultimately really the call to the extraordinary is to become an adult. And I love how he breaks down every story into its kind of mythological elements. And he's a genius.
Yeah, he's really good. And I've thrown him in our latest film as well. So what I do is take the guests that come into London Real Studios, and when we're making a film, they just become part of the film. So
that's great.
So yeah, so I use the hero's journey as well. Our movie last year, Iron Mind. So the call to me was to come to New York City and train with John Joseph and do the Ironman. Of course, I refused the call at first because, what am I? I'm busy. I can't do an Ironman race. Then I accept the call. I go through all the trials and tribulations, the training, difficulty with my family, and then I go run the race. I finish the race, and I come back with this new knowledge of, getting over my shameful addiction and all of this stuff from the past, and new questions. And we're using the same structure with our latest movie, Reconnect, with ayahuasca being like the calling. I refuse the call, then I go. I drink the medicine, I have all these trials and tribulations, then I come back with this new learnings of, okay, what do we all need to do to make this world a better place? So it's a great structure. It's difficult sometimes.
Even in 2015, when I met you, you had a great arc, and I'm not saying, it almost sounds when we kind of define it so much that it's disingenuous, like we did it on purpose, but you had this arc of, you're this Wall Street banker who was dissatisfied and decided to have a higher purpose in life and reinvent yourself, and started London Real. That was a call from the ordinary to the extraordinary. And then, like you said, you started hiring people and building it up, and finally lived to return to tell the story of what happened, and through London Real and your documentaries and so on. So that's the perfect arc of the hero. And I think it's not so much to say fit your life into an arc on purpose. You should just ask yourself, maybe, am I the hero of my journey? Like, what can I do today to have, even in a microscopic way, something that is a mini call from a mini ordinary to a mini extraordinary. I think it's an interesting challenge. It's an interesting exercise.
I think it's a great exercise, and it's something I ask all my students to do on our public speaking course. I'm like, tell me your hero's journey. And most people will say, I don't have one. I'm not a hero. I've been mediocre my whole life. It's like, no, you actually have a hero's journey. So just tell me one. And wow, if I really think about it, I guess that one time I did this and I went and I learned and I came back. And so it's a good exercise to show everyone that they are a hero in some way. And I think everyone has multiple hero's journeys. I always like to say, I could tell a hero's journey about me trying to get here today. You know, like woke up, I was like, I got to go see James. Oh man, what am I going to take the subway? Am I going to take the taxi? I struggled here and then I got here and then boom, I've got this great knowledge of the transit system. You know, so there's so many different ones that you can tell.
I think that's a great exercise, which I'm going to start doing today, which is how to make every day a mini arc of the hero, because it's there. It's always there. And if you think that way, I think, well, I don't know what will happen. We'll see what happens. That'll be my next experiment.
So this is writing tips from James Altucher, is vulnerability forces you to basically follow the hero's journey arc, because when you start with some vulnerability, you're kind of putting yourself in that position.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you teach someone by that vulnerability, I got to this level, and you come back out the hero.
Right. There's kind of, when you're sharing a vulnerability, there's two arcs of the hero. There's the initial one that you're vulnerable about, you know, going from a heroin addiction to not being a heroin addict. And then there's the being secretive about it to not being secretive about it, because that's a whole other journey. And then there's this idea, again, not just on storytelling, but just in terms of your own personal freedom, which we all aspire to. Being vulnerable, again, trades some aspect of your privacy that you were holding tight to, like you were hoarding it in the bank for no reason. It wasn't gaining any interest for you. It was almost like negative interest. So you were hoarding this aspect of your privacy, and you trade it for freedom, which has so many more benefits than hoarding it. So I think that's an important thing to realize also, like particularly with privacy being such this regulatory catchphrase now.
Let me ask you a question. There's a bunch of people that are talking about masculinity these days, and I've had people like Elliot Hulse on my show, and I'll have more people in the future. And some of them I've seen them on Instagram saying, you know, men shouldn't be vulnerable for the sake of being vulnerable, and they should still be masculine. What do you say to that?
Well, when they're saying it, they're probably right. Like they shouldn't be vulnerable for the sake of being the opposite of masculine. It seems like they're kind of relating vulnerability to the opposite of masculinity, and without defining things like, you know, toxic masculinity, femininity, masculinity. I think, you know, being free allows you to be yourself. So if you're a man, then, you know, being who you are and honest about it allows, like for instance, I'm not going to run an Ironman probably anytime soon. Does that make me more or less masculine? In some ways, it makes me less masculine. I'm not going to have the same testosterone, you know, when you run an Ironman. And yet I feel very masculine just in that I'm very, well, I don't know. The whole gender definition thing is very weird, and it's so much in the news these days. But I feel very masculine just by being exactly who I am, being myself, saying who I am. And it doesn't mean saying who you are is masculine. If you're a woman, being who you are and being free and being vulnerable, that's feminine for you. And for me, it means being masculine. I don't really like all the fact that there's, it's not that I disapprove of this, but I don't believe in 63 shades of gender. I saw in one poll, they identified 63 different genders out there. And I think that's interesting to observe, but I can only be who I am, and I don't know where I am on that gender scale. I view myself as a man, and I think being vulnerable just simply allows you to maximize who you are before you die. You don't want to die. It's just like you don't want to die with $1 billion in the bank. Like you work so hard to make $1 billion, and then what for? When you die and it's still in the bank and you didn't do anything with it, it was just all sort of pointless. You don't want to die with all of this privacy in the bank when you could have instead experienced all the freedom it could have gotten you if you had shared it. And I think that's very important to be the best who you are, whether you're a man or a woman. Probably there's some toxicity in general in life by hoarding all of these vulnerabilities and not letting people see who you really are. I think that's probably toxic rather than toxic masculinity or toxic femininity. I think toxicity in general comes from, hiding things and not trying to improve and so on.
Yeah, and I'll just say, if anybody's out there that thinks that they have something they could never tell someone, I had this big dark black hole that was down in my belly for like 16 years, and I thought that horrible experience I had in New York City would never, ever be anything but bad. And then once I expressed it, it became this source of light for so many people. And somebody wrote me emails and said, yeah, I struggled with pills, and my father struggled, and all these things, and it became this way to uplift all these people. And I never thought that would have been possible, James. So.
Yeah, because self-help is meaningless, but when other people see how you helped yourself, that becomes meaningful. Because then they can see, then their mirror neurons say, oh, he did it, and he's sharing this story, and he's doing fine. And it might have been uncomfortable to share those things. Maybe he lost friends. He maybe lost family. He maybe lost his friends from back in the day. But he gained something new by sharing this. So again, I think it's this act of sharing makes you better, and people are helped by seeing how you helped yourself. Then they get to decide what to do. Rather than reading a self-help book, oh my gosh, I gotta clean up my room now and make my bed and do this, and this because someone says so. They get to decide for themselves. Ultimately, you can't improve unless you're deciding for yourself, rather than just, absorbing information from someone else.
Let's talk about reinvention, which is something you've been talking about for a long time.
And you as well. You're a great reinventor. Breakdancer? What the hell? I did not expect that.
It's so much fun, reinvention. But like, we're literally sitting in a place that just describes your reinvention in a big way, because it's a comedy club that you own, that you regularly perform at. I've seen your videos, and I mean, years ago, I don't think anyone would have thought James Altucher would have been a stand-up comedian. And
no, although people were laughing at my public talks, and everyone was saying to me, I remember I gave a talk in, 2008 to like 5,000 people about finance. And at the end, a couple people came up to me and said, oh, you should be a stand-up comedian. And then in 2014 or 2013, I gave a talk, and a very famous stand-up comedian was right after me. And everyone came up to me afterwards and said, oh, you were so much, I'm not bragging when I say this, that's why I'm not saying his name. You were so much funny, you should definitely try this. So I tried it, and it was horrific. Not that I was horrific, but just the terror was, I had been doing public speaking for 15 years at that point. The terror was unbelievable to do 5 minutes of stand-up comedy. And here I write humorously, I do public talks, I'm sometimes funny on TV, but doing stand-up in a club to a bunch of strangers, that is, or was, extremely terrifying. And I've always been a fan of comedy. I even worked for HBO, which is a well-known channel in the U.S. I worked for HBO Comedy for a while, and I always respected it as an art form, but I was always too terrified to actually do it. And then I felt like, oh, I could do it. Everyone says I could do it. It's just totally a different thing. And then once I realized that, and I realized I still love it, I figured, you know what? I love skill acquisition for things that I love doing, and so I really wanted to get better at this very unique art form. And so it's just been, I keep track of everything else, like my business, my writing, my podcast, my family. But this skill acquisition has become so important to me, and I've seen it reverberate into all other areas of my life as well.
How
It's been such a pleasure. Well, with stand-up comedy, and you've seen this more lately with the intersection between stand-up comedy and a lot of the political and public conversation about what's important in life. But with stand-up comedy, you're kind of training yourself first and foremost to observe unusual things. And so a lot of people will just live life, and this is normal. You take shortcuts so that your thinking is as easy as possible. You won't notice the interesting or the unusual, because it's usually not so important to notice these things. But when you start to make it a practice, like that everything around you could have the unusual in it, the world becomes a different place, and it gives you more material to think about, to talk about, to write about, to observe in yourself. And then if you take that extra stretch of, you could communicate in unusual things in two ways. You could just write about it, and that's fine. Or you can put this weird punchline on it that connects it all the way back to something else, and everyone listens and they laugh because you just took something that they didn't think was unusual, you made it unusual for them, so now they're tense, and then a punchline releases the tension, so now they're comfortable with this unusual thing you brought up, and at the same time they have more knowledge if you're doing it right. Sometimes you could just tell a fart joke, and that's funny also, and that makes people laugh, and laughter is good for health. But the best stand-up comedians are taking something they find fundamentally unusual in society or in life, and they stretch it to the point of tension, and then they twist it so that everyone laughs, everyone relaxes, but they leave with something new.
What's happening when people laugh? You must have thought about this.
Yes, and there's a lot of research as well. So for me, one thing I've noticed too is that I was able to take as I learned stand-up comedy, I was able to take other aspects of my life and kind of skip the line in terms of learning stand-up comedy faster. It takes a long time to get good at this art form, but I was able to take my analytical skills that I've learned from doing hundreds and hundreds of podcasts or starting businesses or investing. You have to be very analytical, as you know, to be a good investor, to be a good writer. You have to really analyze like every word. You have to read other stories. What are they doing? And so I watch other professional comedians analyze every aspect of what they're doing. Then the benefits of a podcast, I get to have them then on my podcast and ask them all the questions I didn't understand about their recent performances. So I'm very analytical, and I was able to bring that into my stand-up comedy skills. And part of the being analytical is understanding what laughter is. And I think what it is that millions of years ago, chimpanzees, which don't speak a normal language as we know, they would hear rustling in the bushes, and they would all jump up into the trees. And then once they realized the rustling was just the wind and not like a lion or a bear or whatever, they would start making a noise that sounded like laughter, and that would relax everybody, and they would come down from the tree. So I think that's the evolutionary roots of laughter. And so as a consequence, we've evolved so that laughter becomes this really healthy thing. And there's a lot of research on this, the more you laugh, the less inflammation you have in the body, the less diseases related to old age that you have. And I think it's because our body rewards us for these times millions of years ago when we were safe. The chimpanzees that paid attention to laughter survived, and then we evolved as a result of that.
And there's a group dynamic as well, which is why they put laugh tracks in the TV shows we used to watch when we were kids. I mean, when other people are laughing, you kind of also want to laugh.
Right, and so that's a great thing too. Like when you're about to perform in front of a group of strangers. First off, every room is different. You can't do the same act twice in a row. When you walk into a room full of strangers they don't know you, and you're going on stage, and their only expectation is that you might make them laugh, and your expectation is nothing because you hope to make them laugh, but you have no idea. So you have to. So you have to have this, you build this skill of reading the room, which was very different when I was just public speaking. You still had to read the room, but not as much. Like I only had to read the room enough to know, okay, they're interested in this topic. Here's an approach to this topic that will keep them interested. But you have to very carefully read almost every, like if there's 1,000 people in the room, you kind of have to see each person and who's going to laugh, who's going to be a problem. But sometimes a room is seated in such a way that there's like empty spaces, if the club is not crowded. And it's not just this club. I've even performed at a Comedy Store in London and all over the country and all other clubs in New York City. Sometimes the way people are seated will prevent laughter from going viral. Sometimes if these people are tourists from Sweden and these people are tourists from Venezuela, they might not, their laughter might not go viral. So you have to figure out how to build, literally it's called tribe building. You have to figure out how to build a tribe between these two tables so their laughter could go viral. So all of these kind of persuasion techniques, play into how you're going to get people to laugh, even if, your material is exactly the same. You have to do different things to kind of make your material work. Or you don't use your material and you just play with the audience. You have to read the room very carefully. But yeah, and the other thing is too, here's an interesting thing. If you're making jokes that are a little bit edgy, you have to make sure the women in the room are laughing, particularly if they're there with a date, because the date will look towards, is the woman laughing? So that gives me permission to laugh.
Right.
So you know, and there's another interesting thing too, which is kids laugh 300 times a day, but the average adult laughs just 5 times a day. And you know, because I guess we have more responsibilities, we're not just playing pranks on each other anymore. We have more fears. We deal with more stressful people. We have more stresses in our lives. So when a group of people come in to a club, and let's say you're the first act, they're not yet warmed up. Now you're asking them to laugh another 300 times. They've just laughed only 4 or 5 times during the day total. So you have to understand where you are in the lineup and where the audience is. So there's so many factors that come into play in just that one thing you said, laughter. And sometimes you have to also realize they might be enjoying the act, they might be smiling, and you might be killing it even though they're silent. And so there's just all sorts of things you have to be aware of. And then you have to be aware of, am I panicking right now because they're silent? They've been silent for 15 seconds. Am I doing something wrong? And then you have to make sure, you know, you relax your shoulders, you slow down. The tendency when you panic is to speed up and to crouch over, but you have to do the opposite of that, and you have to be self-aware.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.